Donald Miralle is an award-winning sports photographer. His first professional job as a photographer was with All Sports Photography, an industry leader that eventually became part of Getty Images. With more than 50 international awards to his credit, including 6 World Press Awards, Donald Miralle has been recognized as one of the most innovative photographers in the field of sports photography for the past 2 decades. So welcome, Donald. It's great to have you this evening.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Deborah, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So for the first part of this program, we're going to go ahead and take a look at your work, Donald, and of course, the current Olympics that you just covered in 2021. And then we're going to go ahead and take a look at some other wider shots that you got in Tokyo while you were there. And pull up your first image here.
Yeah, so this is from obviously the Tokyo 2020 Olympics. Happened a year later, 2021, but this was actually the first day of competition. I had about 2 hours sleep after covering the opening ceremonies, and that's pretty par for a course for covering Olympic Games. You don't get a lot of sleep. There's events going all day long for 20 days or 17 days or so. And so you're working these 20-hour days, getting 4 hours sleep. And this was day one for me, was covering the cycling road race on 2 hours sleep, which was brutal. But you have caffeine, you have adrenaline, you're going, and you want to get the shot. And for me, the shot of this race was a fairly remote shot. It took us 4 hours to get to. And I think because of that, because it was so far away, not that many photographers ended up doing this picture, because it took you away from the start and the finish line. And a lot of my colleagues who work for newspapers or wire services, they have to capture someone coming across the finish line, or they have to get someone at the start because they may not finish the race. But for me, with my assignment that I was doing for National Geographic, my job was to capture, in my opinion, what the best photo was of that event, or something that was kind of iconic to Japan, which is, and you see this in this photo, is Mount Fuji, and in the background looming through the clouds. And so when we finally got to this location, I was at this location waiting for 4 hours for the cyclist to show up. And it was supposed to be a dedicated photo position. And next thing we know, we're in with probably 50 or 60 civilians, Japanese civilians that are kind of in our area. And next thing you know, myself and I think there was maybe one other photographer there, we're kind of getting ushered out. Like, you guys aren't supposed to be here. And I'm like, wait, we have a credential. We've been waiting here. And literally, like, maybe after waiting for 4 hours, 10 minutes before this happened, he finally said, okay, you could stay here. And that was a challenge. It's always a challenge when you go to a foreign country and there's a language barrier. And even more so when you're in a foreign country and you're kind of in the middle of a pandemic. And Japan is not in the same place the United States is in right now. I mean, they're still completely shut down. And as a journalist there, you can't go there unless you have a work visa. And once you have a work visa, you're going from your hotel room to the venue. Luckily, this venue was out in the countryside, in this rural area, in the hills, and it lined up. And I think it works compositionally with the riders coming through on the left-hand side, doing this dynamic turn, and then you have Mount Fuji in the background,
So how did you decide to do it in black and white as opposed to color?
Good question, Deborah. So, like, a lot of times I stripped out color when I feel the color adds nothing to the photo. And in this picture, in color, it's fairly back or side lit. You can see the sun's kind of coming from the right side of the frame, and the colors are muted already. The clouds are in and out. And the color really didn't do anything for me. And then when I switched to black and white, when I was editing it, the composition popped. The white line, the riders leading in the left-hand side of the frame. The rule of thirds, where there's a nice dead space on the right, and then you see Mount Fuji coming up in the background. And compositionally, it just popped for me more. So a lot of times when I switch something, or I decided to go monochromatic with it, it's because I feel like the photo was kind of meant to be monochromatic. The photo, compositionally, has more punch as a black and white photo. And if I showed you,
I think it would help to see a few more pictures so that we can kind of talk about the overall process. I mean, obviously, This one, you had to, you selected a site, how far in advance did you scout out the site?
So like pretty much like with every venue at the Olympic Games, say there's 32 venues, or I think there's actually up to 40 now. Every venue, you had to log in on a site and get hold of the photo manager and tell them you're coming a full 24 to 48 hours in advance. So you had to plan everything out. And I was in a position where I'm going to a different venue, if not even 2 to 3 to 4 different venues a day. So everything is very strategic. I have to get there in time, well ahead of time. And we're traveling by buses. We're traveling by, Olympic transit. We're not part of, we can't mingle with the public. And so that was a huge challenge, as opposed to past Olympics. So you go to the Olympic Games, there's the Olympic rings everywhere. There's a photographer that told me years ago, he said, if you don't have an Olympic rings in the photo, it's not an Olympic picture, and it's true. A lot of the photos you see coming on Olympics has the rings in it. In this case, I thought it was part of this story of Simone Biles, who was one of the, obviously one of the greatest athletes in gymnastics, but also one of the biggest names at this Olympic Games. I was there when she did one vault in an empty stadium, and then she walked off, and nobody knew what was going on. And it was one of the biggest stories of the first week of the Olympics, was her pulling out for personal reasons. And then a week later, she came back and did one of her strongest apparatuses, which is the beam. So this is the second of her stepping out, and you can see a little puff of powder on her toe. And this is her starting her beam exercise. And I thought it was kind of smart if I zoomed in and I just showed a detail shot of her on the beam with the Olympic rings and showing her great pedicure as well, So, and that's kind of the story behind that photo.
How much cropping do you do in post-production, or are you pretty much visualizing the work through the lens of the camera?
I'm trying to do it through the lens of the camera. And in this case, I'm probably about 40 feet away, and I'm shooting with a 600 millimeter lens. So there's a little bit on the bottom of the frame and a little bit to the right. And I just applied a little L crop to it and got rid of that, it was extra information. And I thought the way this worked better with, just a little tighter crop. But for the most part, Deborah, when I'm shooting, especially an event like the Olympics, where you're shooting 10,000 images a day, I think over the course of 20 days with the preliminaries and closing and everything going on, I shot over 200,000 images. So I don't have time to mess around with photos that much. I get the picture, it comes in my computer, I ingest it, I crop, levels, sharpen, and it's off to the client. It's gone. I don't think I really sat down and looked at my pictures with a fine-tooth comb until I got home, to San Diego, weeks later, and I finally recovered from the event. But for the most part, I choose my lens. I see it a certain way. The lens and the camera is an extension of my eye and my hand, and I just see it, and I kind of know what I need to do to get that photo. And this was a long lens telephoto shot. So this is my little ode to Muybridge, and this is just an in-camera multiple exposure. But I don't normally do these kinds of photos, but at the Olympics, at the diving event, and I think I did at gymnastics, it made sense when you had these bodies in motion flying through the air, and these cameras, shutter speeds are so fast, and they have this in-camera exposure now, multiple exposure, that's so good that these images come straight out of the camera. There's no post needed. You shoot this, and then the camera puts together 10 frames perfectly exposed. And well, you actually have to choose the correct exposure. Let me take that back. But it puts it together in this photo sandwich that shows, I feel like, the form of what the athlete's doing, the dynamic. And this is the Japanese synchronized diving 10-meter platform. So these guys are a good 33 feet off the ground, flipping around like this right next to each other. And it's amazing. These guys, I think, got second to the great team from Great Britain. And that was a bit of an upset because I think the Chinese male divers usually win this event.
And a question, I think, for Deborah and also for you, Donald. So there's really, I mean, as we can see in this image, but of course, all of your images, there's an art to documenting, events like this and to sports photography. We talked a little bit about your art background, Donald, and how it led to the work that you create now. But for, I guess, both of you, what really sets apart the professional photographer who is documenting these events from, say, somebody who might be up in the bleachers, in the crowd? What are some of the things that really kind of go into it?
So personally, I think the ability to switch gears, like be able to go from gear one, which is maybe, okay, you're walking in and you're shooting the scene, a wide angle of the scene. Gear two, you're shooting action of the athlete. Gear three, you're thinking about, okay, where can I find a cool artistic shot, like a multiple exposure or maybe a slow pan shot or something showing the dynamic of the sport. And then after that, you're thinking, okay, what's my fourth or fifth gear? That's being there to pretty much capture the moment when an athlete wins the event and it's history. There's someone hitting a home run. There's someone winning a gold medal. I'm not going to be shooting at like a fifth of a second or doing a multiple exposure when Usain Bolt comes through the 100-meter finish. I mean, that's when I'm freezing the action. I've got a long lens on it and I'm capturing that moment. So I think being able to switch gears as a sports photographer is important, because a lot of times your client has expectations. They've got expectations on what you're going to deliver as their photographer. And if you're able to deliver a wide range of coverage from that night, switching different gears, but covering everything, I think you'll find that, not only will they hire you again, but you'll have a higher success rate.
I think too, Kevin, it's also about access and intent. People who are in the stadium as, viewers, they don't have the same access. You talked about being able to take the bus to go to, or transportation to different locations, kind of a photographer's box. And also their intent is to kind of capture the experience, and you're there to capture the experience, but in a different way. It's not that, it's a little bit more of a relationship, I think, with the subject, and showing them in the best possible way, and from a vantage point that we wouldn't normally have in most cases.
It's that proximity, right? That intimacy, Donald, that you get to have by having that specific kind of access.
Yeah, and I also think, some photographers get the best access in the world, but they don't come away with photos. This photo here is shot from the stands where fans are, or where fans would have been. So I think it's a matter of also knowing the nuances of the sport, the little nuances of the sport, whether it's an athlete, this athlete's going to do a certain thing or turn a certain way, or there's something different, or finding a clean background, like finding this dark background. I had to get in the stands and get in this position where there was no lights in the stadium, this one corner. And it was the one clean corner in the entire building. If I shot this anywhere else down where they say the press tribune is, like the field of play area for the photographers is where I started, the background was horrible. It was the busiest, ugliest background you've ever seen. So I often, when I get to a place, like Deborah was saying, I get to a place and I have an intent. My intent is to tell a story, but I want to tell that story in a clean graphic way. Like if you shoot, that's one of the first things I learned early on was, if I'm shooting a great picture at a sports event and the background is horrible, it's not a great picture. Like, it's not. Like, you need to find a clean background. And if that background comes into play, that background has to have something about it, that has interest, or it's, it's not distracting. In this picture here, this is one of the things I specialized in, is underwater photography. I was a swimmer for years through high school and college, competitive swimmer. So when I first started sports photography, I started off shooting my friends on the swim team. I'd go in the pool and shoot them. And that, 25 years later, I'm setting up the underwater camera at the Olympics. And that's something I've done since 2004 in Athens. So this access here is not everyone gets this access. I've worked years and years and years to be able to get this access. And even if you're shooting, normally you have to be shooting for one of the large agencies. So, which I was not doing in this case. In the past I have, but in this case, luckily, I went through all the channels to get our camera in the pool on specific days when American swimmers were swimming or there's a big event that was pertinent to our coverage. And this day, this is the 100-meter breaststroke final. That's Adam Peaty up there, the world record holder. And I mean, if you just look at his tricep, the thing is about to pop. You know, it's amazing, like the detail you can see underwater. And the reason I love underwater photography is it's different every time you go out. Every single time you go out, it gives you something different, something unexpected, you know, whether it's lighting wise or the way the water's moving around the subject, whether it's a human or a dolphin, every time it's different. And that's why.
So is the camera worked remotely? You place the camera and then work it from outside? I
work it from the pool deck. So there's different types of underwater cameras. The one I use is fairly old school. I set that camera, I focus it, I frame it, I get the exposure dialed. It's all enclosed. There's a triggering wire that goes out of the pool, which I have to line up and go to the spot where I'm sitting. And literally, I mean, that setup takes hours and hours. And I have to get that access because I'm going in the field of play where athletes are. I have to get that access days and days in advance, you know, on top of just initially getting the okay from everyone who's in charge of this. So the hard thing is, since this is kind of a blind shot, after I set it up, it's blind. It's not a robotics camera that a lot of the agencies use that move around and you have a live view. This is a static camera. I framed it. And so when they're jumping in the water, I'm guessing that we're firing it when they're going through the area. And in the past, I've used some robotics cameras, and it's interesting because with the robotics cameras now, you can move around, you could zoom, you could change the angle, you could change the exposure. But in some ways, all those complications, or not complications, but all those variables, sometimes you miss stuff, I feel like, or the camera goes down. There's a lot of moving parts. Like there's multiple agencies' cameras that burned out or literally burned out in the housing during the Olympics because there's just so many moving parts, so many wires, so many gears. So this is a pretty simple setup, but for what I'm doing, it works great.
So do you have a monitor on the surface that you can see what you've captured? Oh, so you don't know until you get the camera.
No, it's like film days. You have no idea until you pull that camera out 2 hours after competition, and you pull it out and you look at the card, and you don't know how many times, Deborah, I've pulled out a card and there's nothing on it. How many times I've pulled out a camera and something went wrong, it just didn't fire, or the exposure is off. So it's kind of fun. It's kind of like developing film in that aspect because you don't know what you have till it's over. So like this picture for me is kind of like almost like a study in light and form, which I enjoy doing in photography, whether it's sports or anything else. What I like to do is I like to chase after nice light. And I was talking to a couple colleagues about the athletics venue, and most of the competition was happening like kind of in harsh light, or it was raining, or at night. And I went there one day when during prelims, I believe, well, not prelims, but during the morning session. And in the morning session, they were running the triple jump final. And I kind of went to the highest part of the stadium I can go to, because I wanted a kind of a bird's eye view of when the shadows were playing on the field of play. And this is the gold medalist doing his first jump. And this light only lasted for maybe, I would say, less than 5 minutes. How this patch of light was where he was on the track. And I happened to catch it when he was in full stride. And then what I did as well is I slowed down the shutter to 1/25th. And I'm following along with a really long telephoto lens on a monopod and kind of panning with him as he's going through this light. And so this is one of those pictures where you have to, mentally know what you're doing, and technically, you have to kind of nail the shot as well. Everything has to kind of come together, but it just is a classic example. I had a similar picture in 2004 from the hurdles where I got this hurdler going through this little shaft of light, and it's just one of those aesthetically pleasing photos, I think. But what do you guys think?
So yes, of course it's gorgeous, and the play of light and the use of color is really quite wonderful. The fact that it's he's wearing green and yellow, and you've got the red showing in the light. You said that you take about 10,000 pictures in a day? Was that what you had mentioned before?
I mean, usually, Deborah, when I'm taking a lot of photos in one day, that usually means I'm struggling. So that usually means I'm chasing after something and I'm not getting it.
Okay.
So if I could get that number down to closer to 2,000, that means I'm like kind of strategically doing what I'm doing. This is the Canadian team winning the gold medal. The minute they knew they won, and just the girls' faces, like that. I mean, that's the story right there. The Canadian gold medalists. And it came down to penalty kicks. It was a crazy game. That came down to penalty kicks. So
there are multiple games that are that they have to play to finally get to those finals. So you must have an incredible schedule of what games you're going to actually be at and photograph.
Yeah, because everything, Deborah, crosses over. I mean, there's multiple sports going on multiple days. You have to follow the schedules. You have to figure out when the gold medal match for this is, or when this person is competing that has a big name, or if you're working for a client that has a shot list of different athletes you need to figure out the days those athletes are competing. There's so much that goes on to it planning wise, logistically wise, and in this event, I've been at past Olympics when I've been part of a team of 20, 30 photographers, 10 photographers. I was a lone wolf at this Olympics. And that's a lot to have on your shoulders, like to go to Olympic Games and realize, all right, I got to attack this event and cover it as one person. And my strategy, like I had to figure out my schedules and what I wanted to do and the pictures I wanted to get, well before it happened. And sometimes you have lucky, fortunate accidents, but other times, like there's a picture that I was going for and I went in there and got it, and it's really hard because it's a lot of pressure because you feel like you want to go in there and get the best picture possible. And that's what every photographer wants to do going in there. Like, I don't care how non-competitive you are, you're going to the Olympic Games. You want to come out of that venue or out of the Olympics with a photo that you're proud of. And maybe it's a photo that someone else didn't get, This picture here. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Deborah.
Oh, I was just going to say that you've mentioned luck or being in the right place, but it's really, luck is really about being knowledgeable and being prepared. And you mentioned having one kind of camera around your neck, the other kind of camera. So you allow the luck to come to you in so many ways, and the vast years of experience and kind of knowing the sport, and I think all of that adds to it. So
100%. There's an editor that I worked with early on in my career, Daryl Ingham, and I'm lucky I had an editor like that when I was first kind of forming how I was going to shoot sports photography. And he always told me, and he's English, he would be like, "Donald, mate, you have to remember the 6 Ps." I'm like, "What are the 6 Ps, Daryl?" He's like, "Proper preparation prevents piss poor performance." In a very Windsor English voice. And that the 6 Ps is what it's all about. I mean, you have to put the preparation in. You have to know not only your gear, but know where you're going with that gear, what you're going to shoot, what they're going to do. And you have to set yourself up for success by being prepared. If you're not prepared, if your camera's just the wrong shutter speed or the wrong aperture, you're not going to get it. It's done, if it's not sharp. So there's so many things that go into that preparation. It's not just walking up and shooting a photo. This was, for me, like I was in disbelief watching this young man do a 200-meter freestyle, and he has no arms and he had one leg, and it was, for me, I just wanted to try to somehow capture what he has to do, and I just went tight as I could, captured his face, and he's looking right at the camera, and his arm coming out, stroking, and
so many of these are black and white. Was that again a post-production choice, or were you shooting in black and white?
I decided to pretty much everything when I put together like my portfolio at the end of the event. I look at all the photos together. That's when I go to these events. At the end of the day, when I get home, I look at my work, like the body of work. I look at it and say, how is it going to work best together? How is it going to tell the story or paginate best all these photos together? Because, you know, there's some photos that work great as a one-off, but with the Paralympic photos, I felt like it was better as a black and white story. And it just kind of, you know, I mean, I think it's simplifies the photo, and it shows it for what it is. You know, here, you know, you see what it is. He's running by this temple, and he's in the marathon competition, but he's got one arm, you know. And I feel like in the Paralympic photos, even the ones I've done in the past, I've done a lot of work, you know, with challenge athletes and Paralympic athletes. And I feel like when you kind of just strip things down to black and white in those instances, it kind of tells the story a little more direct. So, yeah, the Olympics and Ironman World Championships for me have, I think, in my sports photography, have created the most important photos for me personally.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank you again, Donald, for joining us, and Deborah also for the conversation this evening. I want to thank everybody who tuned in also on YouTube and had so many great comments to share, as well as some fantastic questions for us. I want to make sure that everybody stays tuned to any updates, so feel free to go to mopa.org, find ways to support, keep in touch with all the exciting things that are going to be happening this fall.